Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Let's Grow show. And today I am joined by Sarah Pennell from Foodbank Australia. Hi, Sarah.
Morning.
So just to really, I always like talking to Sarah about this stuff in a public forum because Sarah and I have worked together since 2020 and we've been on the phone to each other. I mean, it's less these days, but it's gone from daily to a couple times a week to once a week. So it's we're getting better. But effectively we've been on a journey over the last 4 years to move away from a model that fundamentally was about responding to supply or requested supply, and move towards a model that starts to give us a resolution or a viewpoint on where supply might be needed, in a pure quantitative way, in a way that we can quantify. One of the key inputs to that, the inputs to the way Foodbank Australia has conducted itself in the market, is the annual Foodbank Hunger Report. And so we've just had the release of the 2024 Hunger Report, which I believe will be of great interest to people who are either in the sector or around the sector. So I've invited a bunch of you from the food industry. We had something close to 90 registrations today, Sarah, so we've got a bit of interest. Yeah, I think it's really important that we focus on that. So my gig, or my company's gig, is to help Foodbank produce a product called the Hunger Map. And the Hunger Map effectively starts to talk about the gaps between existing supply and forecasted demand. So that's something that we hatched in 2020 and we've been refining ever since. It's also something that we're very proud to say has been utilised not only within Foodbank but also across a couple of other charities in Australia, where we're starting to see some on-the-ground collaboration around geographies of need, which is really cool. And so, Sarah, just for everyone who hasn't been exposed to the Hunger Report in Australia, can you just give us a background? You've been doing it for how many years now? I want to say 13.
So this will be the 12th year.
12th year. Okay, cool.
Of the Hunger Report. It started as a very lightweight survey of our charities that we give food to, just to provide a PR hook. And it has really grown since then. So when we first started, we didn't have any aspirations of it being, a serious piece of research. But now we certainly believe that it is, top notch. And really it's the only it's the only annual research into food insecurity in Australia that exists. The ABS doesn't look at this in any detail. They have one question in the census. Others kind of dip in and dip out, but we're the only ones that have been doing this consistently for more than a decade. So it really is the go-to reference now in terms of food insecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just really shout out to a couple of people. We've got Lisa from the Caribbean and Natalie from the east of England. So we are having people. What time is it there? It must be, okay, hideous o'clock, I'm assuming. But thanks for joining us. So, over the years, we've been able to get a clearer and clearer idea of food insecurity in Australia. A few years back, we started to isolate different community types and the degree of vulnerability that there is. And of course, in the work around the mapping, we've started to see the resolution points, or rather the connection points between different types of vulnerability that lead to food insecurity. So, that's also a big opportunity for us going forward. But this year, we've had cost of living concerns, not just this year, but probably over the last 18 months or 2 years. And, they've really become pronounced in the last 12 months. Is there anything in general terms you'd like to talk about regards to cost of living?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, it's a huge factor. It's been interesting over recent years. We've kind of ricocheted from one crisis to the next. I remember back in 2019 when it was, one of the worst droughts ever experienced in Australia, and we went straight from there into COVID. and then straight from there, with a detour to Black Summer bushfires, and
just a slight detour, yeah,
straight to the cost of living crisis. It's been very interesting looking at the impact of all of those events on food insecurity. One thing that's particularly noteworthy is that during COVID, when the government increased benefits to unemployed people, and there was a coronavirus supplement, which went to all those people that were suddenly unemployed for the first time because of the shutdowns in hospitality and food service, etc. Those increased amounts went to, people who had previously been on benefits as well. So their benefits went up.
Yes, that's right.
The outcome of that was, during the height of COVID, food insecurity went down dramatically. Because people living under the poverty line suddenly had some money in their pockets, and guess what? They spent it on food. So that was a really interesting period when we could see what the impact of, for instance, raising the rate of benefits might have on the well-being of vulnerable people in Australia. But that was very short-lived, because then all those benefits got rolled back when things got back to normal, and we then immediately went into the cost of living crisis, and those people on the brink of not being able to cope were thrown back into hardship. So for the last year or so, well, certainly last year's Hunger Report, one of the biggest things that we were able to report was that more people than ever before were seeking food relief, and many of those people were seeking it for the first time ever. Yeah. So we were absolutely seeing a new segment of the population not being able to cope. And that was huge for Foodbank, because these were people that didn't know where to get food relief, weren't used to asking for food relief. So we needed to respond to that and change our model, be where they were presenting our services in a way that would work for them. So
yeah, and I think
really having to change in order to be of service. But bringing it up to the present day, the latest Hunger Report has shown that those people that were new a year or two ago to food relief have stabilized somewhat again. They've become used to the situation with their mortgages and the interest rates and the cost of living, etc. And so they're faring a little better. But what really worries me is those people, the long-term vulnerable, they got knocked hard during the cost of living crisis, and they're not and that they're not coming back. So I'm really worried that these people will never fully recover. And, they will be set back permanently, which will lead to kind of generational impacts, and that divide within society will just entrench.
Yeah, and to reinforce that this year, am I echoing to you or just me?
Sorry?
I just got an echo. Just to reinforce that, we had this year in the report, just looking at it now, the 48% of Australia's low-income households are experiencing food insecurity, and it's at the highest rate we've seen for that cohort. It's up 5% from 2022. So it's a significant increase for people who are not doing it well. And to paint a picture for people around the world, those of you, Natalie in England you know, I'd expect that you wouldn't be seeing a great deal different. What we know about the average person in Australia is we know through partnership with a financial institution that the expenditure on food has increased marginally over a time when food itself at pricing point has increased quite dramatically in some areas. And that just tells us that there's less food or lower quality food going into the average pantry. So it's something we're keeping a watchful eye on, because we know that that means to an extent that these people are teetering on the edge of one other issue and away. Now, I'd also want to say that we're a very wealthy country, and here we are with 48% of our low income earners experiencing food insecurity. So if you are listening in from Africa, and Olu from Nigeria, I guess comparatively we don't have the same extent of issue, but it is rather remarkable that a country like Australia, with its wealth comparatively internationally, is suffering such high degrees of food insecurity.
I mean, obviously here in Australia, food insecurity is less obvious for a variety of reasons. One thing is there's a great amount of embarrassment and shame around it. So people tend to hide their inability to feed themselves and their families. They feel as if they've failed. The other thing, of course, is food insecurity is a spectrum. It ranges from, at the marginal end, just people who are extremely anxious and constantly worried about having enough food or putting enough food on the table for everyone in the family. It then becomes making compromises around food. So as Scott has said, buying cheaper food, relying more and more on cheap carbohydrates instead of getting the valuable protein, fresh fruit and vegetables and so on. We saw this in the Hunger Report. One of the ways people cope is reducing the amount of protein, dairy and fresh fruit and vegetables that they purchase. And then people start to actually reduce the size of their meals or the frequency of eating, right through to going entire days without eating. So that's the spectrum of food insecurity. And obviously there are ramifications at every one of those points. The impact of stress around food, can lead to mental health issues. It means people are unable to focus on other things, like finding a job or finding a home. When you're just spending your day worrying about where you're going to get food from, there's very little bandwidth to think about anything else. And then when you've got people that are compromising their food choices or not eating at all, there are huge physical health ramifications for that as well, both in the short and the long term.
Yeah, and I think this is probably consistent amongst developed countries out there. In fact, well, from what I know, it is. This divide for us in Australia between the haves and have-nots is becoming more and more pronounced every year. And when we talk about degrees or a spectrum of food insecurity, please know that the vast majority of households that are experiencing food insecurity are experiencing it at a severe level. The vast majority of people who are, experiencing it are experiencing it hard. And at the other end of the scale, the people who are super comfortable is the other. It's a big U, in fact. And so to some extent, we're mimicking the US, and the UK, no doubt, has a very similar situation. Ida's got a question that I could be.
Yes, look, I'm less familiar with the global picture, but all the reports I read is that certainly global food insecurity is increasing. And I always look to food insecurity as a proxy for wealth generally. I mean, notwithstanding natural disasters, wars, etc., which are a factor as well. But yes, we're seeing food insecurity increasing globally, which of course is counter to our sustainable development, our global sustainable development goal, which is to eradicate hunger by 2030. We're going in the wrong direction at the moment. And the cost of living crisis, which is being felt everywhere, is a major contributing factor to that at the moment. And there's kind of glimmers that we're on the improve, but as I say, certain segments are being left behind. They're not sharing in that recovery.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention too, and I don't want to be, actually you'll find this hard to believe, Sarah, but I don't want to be controversial. But, I think when it comes to, we think about, ESG or environment, there is a lot of attention given to the environment when it's fair to say that even in developed companies, the S needs a lot of work in the context of, food security is a basic Maslow need at the very bottom of the hierarchy. We haven't really tidied that up yet. And it's, certainly in countries like Indonesia, like the Philippines, like Nigeria, there are epic struggles with hunger, and it's a totally different magnitude. And yet the haves have nots rule stands consistently. Perhaps the difference is it's less balanced. There are less haves and more have nots. But, in the end, there are just very different challenges. As Sarah mentioned, one of the big challenges in Australia is, as we have new entrants into food insecurity, trying to find food relief that have very low to no awareness of where to go, very low to no propensity to walk into a charity to seek help, and potentially, we have seen in previous years more of a reliance on family and friends, and we've seen a slight reduction in that this year, which might also tell us that people are loath to admit to others that they're having a hard time. I suspect that when you go to countries that are literally suffering death from malnutrition, the issues are quite different, right? It's about logistics and getting food to the right areas, and it certainly is that here. But we have an awareness job to do to say it's okay to reach out for help if you need it, and that helps here, and to make it known more broadly where to get that help. Do you agree with that?
Look, we've just had the Global Food Banking Network Summit in Sydney, where food banks from 50 countries came together, and it was so interesting to hear what the different factors are that impact on food insecurity in different countries. Scott is right. It's very different on different continents, different factors at play. But the impact is, devastating no matter what the cause. And every country that is experiencing food insecurity really wants to tackle it. It's crucial. It's crucial not only for the well-being of individuals, but it's crucial for the well-being of the society and the country economically. There's an enormous amount of productivity and benefits that are lost when people are suffering from food insecurity and therefore not, leading their best lives. So I think there needs to be, in places like Australia, where until recently there wasn't even an acknowledgement that there was a food security problem. I think we really need to get serious about tackling it.
Yeah.
And, we're in a position at the moment where, successive governments have seen any mention of food insecurity as some kind of indictment of their welfare policy, so they don't want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's left to charities like ourselves to provide that safety net for something that, a lot of people don't even want to admit exists.
That's right.
But, during COVID and the cost of living crisis, it's become something that people can't ignore. And I hope that means a new commitment to actually doing something about it. And recent government inquiries and so on have actually made recommendations that there should be a national food strategy. There should be a food minister that
Yes.
both country level and individual level food security should be a policy platform in their own rights, and not just something that kind of falls between the cracks of other portfolios, not quite agriculture, not quite health, not quite welfare. It doesn't get the attention it deserves.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in developed countries around that denial. I mean, I think we're coming up to a US election where everyone's beating the table about the strength of economies and things like that. In Australia, we have, had a narrative around having a stronger economy over the last 3 years that we've kind of proven to be false. But I look at things globally like this BRICS currency trading between started by the Brazilians that now is, China and 157 countries, and think about the implications for the US economy and go, wow, Western cultures are, could be a house of cards, including us who are extraordinarily reliant on exports to other developed countries and so forth, and developing countries for that matter. But I think we have most definitely an awareness and engagement challenge in Australia, and that is both at the governmental level, but also at a societal level. We need people to be comfortable asking for help. And as certainly the GFN conference was amazing for me to be there and learn from different countries about. I would be probably the first and most critical about government compassion, but then when you go to other countries where there's not just denial, there's withdrawal and non-support. I mean, our challenges here are nothing like that. But nonetheless, for a country like Australia to have food insecurity challenge, and it is real, we are measuring it and we are mapping it, and we can tell you exactly where it's happening and what kinds of families it's happening to. And it's happening for a myriad of reasons. I mean, here in Melbourne, again, an upper echelon economically of the Australian economy, I still have a row of 20 to 30 cars of women sleeping in their cars with their children at a train station just down the road from me. That's happening. Now, that's not as stark as some of the poverty you'll see around in other places in the world, but it's happening here. And, people need to be aware, but also embrace the things that are going to be required. We are very lucky in this country. We have some amazing support from manufacturers, Sarah, and who have really gotten around food relief in this country. And also, we are gifted that we've got primary production, where we do get. We've got a good combo actually of having a duopoly in the grocery market and some very particular standards around food, and a whole bunch of farmers, because we actually get the shrapnel from that, which is fantastic for Foodbank and for those people who need. So we have distinct advantages, and having recently travelled to Hong Kong where there is no primary production, you're like, oh my God, how do you do this? And other countries where it's just not tenable to grow your own food. But I mean, for here, and we're here to talk about the Australian report. This show is really about raising awareness around food insecurity, and around.
And I think it's important to say that measurement in its different forms has played such an important part of Foodbank bringing attention to the issue here in Australia and being able to get a seat at the table to start discussing solutions. So when I first joined Foodbank, way too long ago, we didn't have any idea the size of the problem in Australia. We just did our bit, took the food that we were able, that we were given by the food industry and redistributed it. And we had the general attitude that our efforts didn't touch the sides, but we do the best we can with what we have. And there you go. And over time, we have aspired to more. We're now at the point where we believe we need to know the exact size of the problem, because we want the Australian government and the corporate sector to aspire to actually solve it. So we need to know the size of it in order to be able to solve it. And being able to do the hunger report and then the hunger map has enabled us to actually determine, to a great degree of confidence, the size of the problem and what it would take to fix it. How much food we would need and where we would need that food to go. And that's an incredibly powerful thing when you're talking to both government policymakers and the corporate sector. In fact, it's one of the first questions corporates ask. It's, I think, perhaps how their minds work. They say, what would it take to solve this problem? And in the past, we haven't been able to tell them because we haven't known the boundaries of the problem. But now we can. Now we can tell them. And that's incredibly motivating for some people.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, simply put, one of the things that we've been working really hard at between the Art of More and Foodbank is, getting an understanding of the requirements of the market. And it actually, at first, it didn't make sense to me that a lot of food banks around the world are in response modality. But, for many countries, this issue is epic. It literally is about how do we keep up. And so it was, the foresight of Sarah and her team that said, you know what, we're in a pandemic, things are changing. We need to get our heads around what demand is, where it's coming from, where it might come from in the future, so that we can, start to organize ourselves logistically, organizationally to service new pockets of demand, and rather than respond to requests for food, particularly pertinent in a market where people aren't asking for help as a rule. And the simple conversation with people around the world that I was having in September was there's a vastly huge difference between discussing what we're doing, which is the old world, and what we're needing. And to be able to advocate to government, corporate sponsors, and so forth, and talk about the need is far more compelling when you're talking about it in a quantified manner, when you can see the volume of kilograms required per community versus the volumes being serviced. And it's not something that Foodbank should be shy about sharing, or anyone in the sector, because the truth is its needs are not being met, and that's okay. But they won't be unless you know what needs are. So I think that's been a big shift for us over the last 4 years. Are there any other standouts for you in the report that you'd like to discuss with you, Sarah?
Well, you've touched on one, but I think it's worth circling back to the fact that the public in need are getting less assistance from family and friends. So family and friends were a significant source of support, and that has dropped dramatically, and we can only speculate, but we believe there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, as you mentioned, as the cost of living crisis drags on, people in need become less and less likely to ask their family and friends. So they, it's fine in a kind of crisis situation, but to keep on asking for help, that becomes something they don't want to do. The other thing is those people who have been providing the help, they're strapped themselves and their own household budgets are under stress.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's becoming harder for them to juggle things, and therefore providing money or food to others becomes more difficult. So that all of that means that added pressure on formal food relief like ourselves, like Foodbank. So we are seeing a dramatic increase in not only the number of people seeking food relief, formal food relief, but also the amount of food they need. So the frequency with which they're coming and the amount of food they need to meet the household needs is going up. And that's what we're contending with at the moment. So while there are some in the population, those people that were kind of first-time seekers last year, are getting back on track, that doesn't mean that it's getting any easier for food relief charities, because those people at the really vulnerable end, the severe food insecure, as you mentioned, Scott, their need is going up.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Just a couple of points here from, although we don't have a food map in Hunger Report in Nigeria. Good comment. And Badaboo, when you're actually watching this video, and I'm sure you are, and happy birthday for the other day. We are working on that at the moment. So talking to the wonderful people at Zero Hunger.
Yes, there was a lot of interest in the hunger map at the Global Food Banking Summit. And Scott is talking to a number of countries about the opportunity for them to develop a map for themselves. It's a very tailored process. You need to look at what data is readily available in your country that you can access. And that's a starting point for kind of building your own hunger map. But Scott's happy to work with countries that want to do that.
And Natalie, for your because you're in listening, for your knowledge, the UK are also very keen to deploy a model at the moment. So some very sophisticated supply issues there, but we're trying to get a handle on demand in the UK. Also, Natalie, you've asked a question and you made a comment before. I want to just reference while Sarah's here about animals. But before we go into animals, I actually want to let you know that you talked about kids going to school without breakfast earlier in your comments. And we do have a map of schools around the country that tells us the level of need per school at a kilogram level, and allows us to look at the schools that are being serviced by a school breakfast program and the schools that are not. So we have that. And then from how many months ago, Sarah, was it? It was about 4 months ago. 4 or 5 months ago, we completed a hunger map of pet owners, and therefore households that are struggling with food insecurity who are pet owners, and therefore animals that might be suffering as a result.
And it was very interesting when we did that exercise, because we thought we were going to see a picture of pets going hungry and pets being surrendered because households can't afford to feed them. But that was not the case. Pets are a highly loved and valued member of Australian households. And so what emerged was a picture of people going without food in order that their pets can eat. And the likelihood of a food insecure family surrendering their pets was extremely low, less than, I think, about 7%. what families were doing was they were compromising their own food further in order to ensure that their pets ate. So, yes, a really distressing picture emerged that pet ownership absolutely needs to be a factor in assessing the food security of a household, because it has a huge impact on the humans as much as, if not more than, the pets.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly a couple of things that I would reference both in Australia and the UK actually is that many years ago I was looking at a stat about the fact that 1/3 of UK households would be single occupancy dwellings by I think it was 2025 or around now. It's certainly there, but we're there now too. We have a very high proportion of single dwelling households in Australia, which invariably means that the new roommate is a pet. So with cost of living crisis and the cost of housing increasing for a lot of people who are living on their own, reliant on that one income, with high propensity to have a pet, you're seeing a fusion point of pressure here that's coming from, societal situation, and then, knocking on to economic. And so there are a number of factors at play here. And I think, one of the things I do want to point out is that this is Australia. We call ourselves the lucky country and we're a wealthy country, and yet 19% of our households are severely food insecure, which means they are struggling to put food on the table every week of the year. So struggling to or stressing about every week of the year. So, that's it's an alarming stat for a country like ours. And, as I am sort of facing into other cultures and countries with this challenge, it's I don't want to I shouldn't be embarrassed by the fact that the scale of our issue is smaller than others. Quite the opposite. I should be embarrassed that the scale of our issue is what it is today, given who we are as a country from a wealth perspective.
I mean, one of the things you have to think about is that in first world countries like Australia, the level of food insecurity is something that we almost choose. It's a factor of the economic system and the welfare system. We choose to allow people to exist beneath the poverty line, and that's something that gives me pause for thought. It's not that we don't have the food, because we do. We're a net exporter of food. It's not that we don't have the resources, the money, the desire to see everybody thrive, but it's not happening, and that's actually a choice we make. And I don't know if just providing food relief, as we do at Foodbank, taking food that might otherwise go to waste and redistributing it, it's great that makes people feel good, that we're doing something, etc. But gee, we could be doing more. We could be actually eliminating hunger.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and remembering too that it's interesting talking to some people from the Philippines about the context of or concept of divorce and how it ain't a thing. Whereas in the US and Australia, we're edging towards a 50% divorce rate. And this year's report said that single parent households, 69% of single parent households in this country are facing food insecurity of some sort, 69%. And 41% of them are saying that they're facing severe food insecurity. So, I think marital breakdowns are part of our society today, huge part of Australian society and the UK and the US in developed countries. Then you've got the cost of living, of housing, with single incomes effectively, and maybe compromised incomes if childcare is involved. Not maybe, definitely. So,
You
these are the types of dynamics that are playing out here.
You would think when you see that there is a group in the community, such as single parents, where 70% of them are food insecure, that would be an alarm bell, and that some, policy action needs to be taken. Some support needs to be provided to those people.
Yeah.
But it's not happening.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem incentive enough for people to stay married. Sorry. But I had to get that one in there. But I think, it is the state of the nation. That is how people are living. Single occupancy households is one thing. We're experiencing an epidemic or a pandemic of loneliness out there. Pet business is a great business to be in the last sort of 8 to 10 years for that reason. And then we've got, staggering divorce rates that don't seem to be decelerating anytime soon. In fact, some of the reports I was looking the other day at some of the reports globally can be a little bit deceptive, because they're seeing reduction in divorce rates, but actually they're seeing a reduction in marriage rates. So it's very hard to get kicked out of a club you don't walk into.
The fact that we can talk about this, as I say, a decade ago, we wouldn't have been able to even identify who these people are that don't have enough food in Australia.
Yeah.
And now we can talk about, exactly who they are, what their circumstances are, how they've arrived at this position where they're food insecure. And it's when you know those facts that you can start to hopefully do something about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And the hunger map has provided that window into who these people are, what their circumstances are, how they've arrived at being food insecure, and what interventions would best help them.
Yeah, and notwithstanding too, for those of you watching from other countries, that COVID was, particularly bleak here for a couple of reasons. There was some of the toughest lockdown laws in the world were actually happening here. Some of the longest lockdowns happened here. In Melbourne, I think we lead the charge at 263 days. But that is a part of it. The other part of it is Australia is a nation where we have a lot of industry dependence. So we had pockets of, tourist dependent areas, for instance, tourism dependent areas that fell over, have not recovered at all. Where we saw the size of businesses closing in some of those tourist areas were massive employers. So, they're not the things you kind of, open a cafe and fix. I mean, we're talking about businesses employing more than 100 people. And then, of course, we had other industries that were extremely impacted, and other areas where, and you do tend to find this, that people that work in specific industries, of course, tourism is natural, but other industries too, tend to live in very similar areas. So you do tend to get some geographies that are very dependent upon an industry, living in the same communities and having an entire community start to collapse as a result. So yes, I know, Natalie, the UK lockdowns were good. You were competitive, but we still won. we just love beating England, Natalie. What can I say? Yeah, I think any other comments, Sarah? Because we have, we've done 44 minutes. There we go.
Look, every year I hope that I'm able to publish a hunger report that shows progress, that shows, that we're moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case in my time at Foodbank. And, obviously things like COVID and the cost of living crisis have contributed to that. The one good thing, though, is we're now in a position with the Hunger Report and the Hunger Map to be able to tell very detailed and a very compelling story. And I think that has led to people both acknowledging that there is an issue and also being more keen to do something about it. So, and I really think the work that we've done with the Hunger Report and the Hunger Map has played a big part in that. So, I'm really proud of
definitely. Yeah, I think for people to visualize it with the map being a new thing has been really helpful, where they can see the extent of food insecurity happening in specific areas. But I'd also say, Sarah and I did do a live audio recently on partnerships. One of the things that I'm a big fan of strategic partnerships, always have been, because of my startup background. But, Foodbank Australia do a phenomenal job with partners. And I will say, to Natalie's questions before, and for the general interest of how we're getting it done here, we had, and I'm not naming companies, Sarah, you can if you want to, but we were supported by a breakfast cereal company to produce the school hunger map, or the schools map. We were supported by a pet food company to generate the pets map and pets view. We are being increasingly supported by other organisations, financial institutions, electricity companies, these kinds of people who are stepping up and contributing to our efforts to get a better understanding of what's happening out there, and to be better able to respond to not just current but also emerging needs. Any final words, Sarah?
We can't do what we do without the support of corporate Australia, and that's both the food industry. Big shout out to the food industry. They provide us with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of perfectly edible food that we can redistribute, and they support us in other ways too, with transport and storage and pallets, and they really go above and beyond. And then non-food industry provide us with funds so that we can have the warehouses we need, keep the lights on, the fridges working, etc. So honestly, we're just a conduit for industry's desire to do something, and for that we're really grateful.
Yeah, and I think Sarah, you might be joining me on a couple of trips, because I think the way you guys have embraced industry and big organisations, corporates around the problem, is certainly something. When I think about Nigeria, and we think about the fact that the vast majority of support for Nigerian food banks is coming from individuals, not companies, we can change that landscape, and no doubt we can do so in other countries where it's not as well supported. But yes, big shout out. The food companies in Australia are phenomenal, and some of them actually make volume specifically for Foodbank, so that they can be relied upon every week. So that's something else. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me and covering off the report. I have put both the extended report and the summary in chat on LinkedIn and on Facebook and YouTube. So you can go and access that there, guys, if you want to dig into more of the detail. And just thanks, Sarah, again for her time. Olu in the background, welcome aboard, buddy. He's just joined our team, and it's after midnight now, or closer to 1 a.m. So I appreciate you being here, mate. So big ups, and thank you all for listening in. We'll check you next time. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.